The human and economic impact of such a catastrophe is almost unimaginable. And as Alistair Leithhead reports from Minami Sanrico, survivors are left simply trying to figure out what to do next.
As the tsunami tore down homes and swept everything away, the little village of Asahigaoka was just high enough up the hill to escape the surging wave. They're still in shock, still unsure who's alive and who's dead. But in Asahigaoka, there's work to be done. Life's now about improvisation. They need drums to boil water. All supplies are cut off. There's no power, no cell phones. But it's organised and efficient. Drinking water is rationed, resources are pooled. Vans bring the essentials to the community centre, rice and fuel. Koji Oyama fell into the leadership role. Everyone's got their own jobs to do. We have 800 people to feed, he told me, with households taking in those made homeless. But we haven't even water clean enough to wash our faces. The army is now starting to help them, but the scale of the task is immense. There are hundreds of these small villages that will need supplies and help for weeks. The priority is now to help people get back to normal, he said. But we've never had anything like this before. This is as far as the tsunami got in this village. You can see everything here was destroyed, as was everything in the valley leading up to it. And we heard there were two people in this house, a man and a woman, both quite elderly. She was rescued, but he was swept away. And then the wave just stopped at the top of this hill. Everything beyond that was fine. Yukio Sato's family home was on the right side of that line, but only just. Debris from the 30-meter high wave stopped just short of the back door. Just here it stopped. And this? So the water got to this level?
It was astonishing. There used to be lots of houses down there, and they're all gone. The buildings from below washed up here and were crushed.
Chance, the difference between a home saved and many lives lost. Life in Asahigaoka is just going to get harder, but the Japanese stoic way of dealing with it helps a lot. For the children, it's different and exciting, but something they'll never forget. And neither will those who lost relatives and friends, homes and possessions, and will now have to begin again. Alistair Leithhead, BBC News, Asahigaoka Village, Japan.
And the scenes are still unbelievable, and given the human toll, it seems almost crass to speak of the economic cost of Japan's catastrophe. Yet, over the last 2 days, the Nikkei has lost more than 16%, and many of the country's largest companies have temporarily suspended their operations. And as nuclear fears mount, so does financial uncertainty. Joining me now from New York is Robin Farzad. He's a senior writer for Bloomberg Business Week. We don't know what the nuclear situation is. We don't know what the death toll is. Do we know what the economic impact is going to be, Farzad?
Right now, the currency and stock markets of the world are just reacting to this with kind of a binary proposition. Is the nuclear situation going to be contained, or is it going to melt down in a Chernobyl fashion that renders a whole lobe of the country unusable? And if that latter worst-case scenario does materialize, you're talking about the world's third largest economy, and an economy that's very export-driven, and the rest of the world's supply chain really relies on Japan.
So, Robin, what happens now over the next few weeks in Japan, given the connectedness of global economies, it's going to have an impact directly, do you think, on other economies around the world?
Some more than others. Again, underscoring Japan's exporting prowess, that's critical. But again, it questions us to look at a whole set of assumptions about risk writ large. I mean, there was an unbelievable financial meltdown, to use it metaphorically and to not be crass, in 2008 globally. And largely, economies and markets have gotten pretty complacent after that. It's almost, you forget that these kind of things happen barely 3 years afterwards. And things like Japan, things like the situation in North Africa, which has largely been forgotten amid the ravages of Mother Nature, let's point that out, show the world that there are so many things that cannot be modeled for, those black swans as they were, and that you know, your underlying assumptions might be wildly off.
But Robin, presumably there will also be reconstruction, and while it sounds hideous, it is also part of economic activity. So you would have a period after this of rebuilding in Japan, which might help Japan at least stave off a second recession?
Correct. I mean, Japan has been largely in an economic funk for the better part of 2 decades. This is an economy and market that peaked in the late 80s when it was supposed to be the heir apparent to the United States, the world's super engine of economic growth, and what turned out to be a massive financial and property bubble that it has not been able to shake off. So Japan has had this long, slow, grinding economic malaise, and this is, I think the conventional wisdom is this is just adds to it. Yes, you can take comfort from the fact that look at what happened after this country was laid low after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it rebuilt in epic fashion in the 25 years or so leading up to the 1970s and set itself up to become one of the world's economic superpowers. So there can be comfort taken from an internal resolve and the fact that the entire country could mobilize around this situation. But there's still so many moving parts. The markets aren't exactly impressed that the government knows what it's talking about, so it's an open question.
Robin Phil said we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Hope, of course, and comfort needed in every situation there in Japan. Well, as Japan's economy struggles to cope with the multiple blows at New York's JFK airport, each passenger flying to or from Tokyo has their own story. For some, it's flying away from the tragedy, while for others, it's a return to a country which has been forever changed. The BBC's Laura Trevelyan has that story.
A routine scene, international arrivals at John F. Kennedy Airport. But there's nothing routine about the experiences of the passengers who've come from Japan. They've left a country scarred by catastrophe. 11-year-old Marin Soki was evacuated from the Sendai disaster zone.
There was an earthquake in Japan, and everything fell and tsunami came. It was so scary.
And what happened to you? How did you get out?
I got out with my friends because I was in the school. So my parents came to pick me up.
Somehow, Marin's family managed to escape.
Now we are here. It's a miracle because many people are helping us, and you go there, you go there, and you take a train, and you take a bus, and you take a taxi, but it's just a miracle.
For those waiting for flights back to Japan, it's a difficult and unsettling time too. While they've been away, their country has undergone a traumatic experience and they don't know what they'll be returning to. We met Natsumi Nishimura just as she was saying goodbye to her sister and mother, who live in Osaka.
They're very anxious, they're very worried about because they're not sure what happened exactly. So, and the earthquake may happen again. So. Yeah, actually me also, I'm worried about them.
Atsuko worries about more earthquakes spreading across Japan. For Japanese passengers, emotions are mixed. Relief at having left the chaos behind is intermingled with concern about what the future holds. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News, New York.
Really wrong. The promise of spring in Tokyo. This should have been the season of hope and reawakening. Instead, the country is in deep shock, dealing with calamities that travel in packs. People are always loath to trust the air they breathe here. Masks against pollen or bacteria are a common sight. But now the breeze carries a new, unquantifiable menace called radiation. It has kept busy streets empty. This is the famous fish market at lunchtime. I've never seen it so eerily empty, this fishmonger told me. A city that is used to never running out of anything is suddenly staring at empty shelves. People have hoarded basic goods in fear of worse to come. Fuel has become a prize only for the most patient. Petrol queues lasting several hours, another first for Tokyo. And then there is the growing urge to just get out, to leave the country. We bumped into Mark Law, British banker, resident of Tokyo, father of 3.
Unfortunately, we can't leave. I have a younger daughter who's in hospital at the moment for scheduled heart surgery, so we can't go anywhere. So, you know.
But if you could, would you?
I'm thinking of getting the family out, yeah.
Where to?
Anywhere close, because my daughter can't travel very far, unfortunately. So, she needs to have aftercare, cardiac aftercare, so it's a bit of a bad situation for us.
Shibuya Junction. This is the busiest zebra crossing in the world at the busiest time of day here in Tokyo. But believe you me, compared to all the other times that I've been here, this is surprisingly empty. Many people have simply stayed at home, either because of transport problems or because they're afraid. And although there's no panic here in Tokyo, there is definitely a sense of nervousness. The Japanese are resilient and resourceful, and the wind has done them a favor, for now, by changing direction and blowing any radiation out to sea. But that's hardly reassuring for a nation dealing with catastrophe in a cloud of uncertainty. Well, let's look at some of the political implications of this unfolding crisis, unfolding on so many different levels, and talk to my guest, Dr. Kuni Miyake. He's the Director of Research at the Cannon Institute for Global Studies. Thanks for coming on the program. I mean, there's been an awful lot of talk about whether the government is responding well to this crisis or not. And of course, we remember the criticism after the Kobe earthquake in 1995. How well are they doing?
Well, we are shocked, sorrow, and fear and anger.
Right.
But we are still not ready to be angry at the government yet, because we are in the middle of the crisis now.
It's too early for that.
Too early for that. And I think so far they are trying to manage, and we have to support them in the middle of the crisis anyway.
Do people in Tokyo, where there are so many rumors and there's so much conjecture about what's actually happening at this power plant, believe what the government tells them on state television?
Well, I don't think there's any cover-up so far, and the chief cabinet secretary has been telling the truth so far. But the question is, we are not dealing with the government, we are dealing with the reactor, and we are dealing with the nature. And I think it's so hard to predict what will happen next.
How much of a blow is this crisis that's unfolding on so many different levels? You could call it a quadruple whammy if you include the stock market. How much of a blow is this to Japan's self-esteem?
It could be huge, but this particular moment we cannot say anything. We just have to recover. The devastated site first. Then we think about the economy. But definitely they will have a blow on the Japanese economy.
1/3 of the power that Japan, the third largest economy in the world, consumes comes from nuclear power. Do you think there'll be questions now about the nature of that?
Well, at this moment, nobody talks about it. But eventually, when we pass the point of height of the crisis, and probably we will start reviewing such question, I guess.
I mean, one thing that's really struck me, Mr. Miyake, is that despite the fact that this is such a serious crisis, as the Prime Minister said, the worst since World War II, the response has been amazingly disciplined and resilient. And is that because Japan has been through some pretty tough times in the last 2 decades?
Well, I think we are trained for this, and I believe that look at the people in here.
I think they seems to be calm. They are not panicking, and I think they are ready to go on for a while. But I think the longer it goes, then probably the more angry they will be eventually against, not against the nature, but against the government. Somebody has to be a guinea pig anyway.
You can't blame Mother Nature, but you can blame the government.
Right.
And do you think this will change the way that this country tries to protect itself in the future from earthquakes and tsunamis? I mean, we know about all the earthquake drills in this country. There aren't any tsunami drills. I guess there can't be.
Well, I think this time it's maybe 3 times or 4 times bigger than the expected worst case scenario. So it's so difficult to predict that things like this will happen again. But still, we have learned so many lessons. And it's time to review all the fail-safe measures concerning the nuclear power plants.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, and we'll all be watching, of course. Dr. Kuni Miyake, thank you very much indeed. Well, there you had a political and social perspective on the crisis here in Japan. And of course, it is 5 days old in terms of the earthquake. But in terms of the unfolding events, this is still very much in its early stages. More later from me in the program.